Hello, BookTube. Welcome to Wales. Welcome to Hay-on-Wye. The weather, don't worry too much about the weather. The weather it's grim in terms of what's immediately overhead, but the forecast is promising that in the afternoon it'll clear up a little bit and we'll get some sunshine. So I will film more. We've arrived, just staying for a day and a bit and then heading back home. I thought I'd take advantage of this incredible quiet countryside with the birds singing and horses and sheep grazing and not a lot of people about yet. It isn't tourist season yet. Take advantage and do a tag. And yet, in a way, I can't do it. I don't have the questions with me, but Andy at Really Random Reads tagged me in the Am I a Book Snob, or is it Snob-O-Meter tag? There's two going around, aren't there? And I haven't brought any materials with me to do that, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to talk about book snobbery anyway, in my own unrehearsed and unscripted way. I've been thinking about this whole issue of book snobbery while I've been watching other people's content and the way they're answering questions. And I feel pretty sure that people might think I am a book snob because of what they see me read, because of what they see me don't read. Perhaps because they've heard me in one video I remember talking about going to Forbidden Planet in London to shop for a graphic novel and giving up in the end because I couldn't find one that really got me excited, I said that I missed words. I wanted words and there weren't very many words on the pages. And I can imagine people thinking, oh yeah, there we go, book snob. I think that's why I want to talk about it, to show where my head actually is on that topic. And that's why I came all the way out into this field, because where I'm standing now is about a quarter of a mile away from the centre of Hay-on-Wye. You can just see some of the buildings there. That's where I've walked from. I just bought some, I went to the deli there. They do their own muesli, and it's really lovely. It's got like toasted wheat flakes and coconut pieces, and I really like it, hazelnuts. So we always buy some when we come here. And then I hiked all the way up into this field because I was watching a short film, and I will link to it in the description box, of a bunch of, I don't know what they were. I actually don't know if they had scientific qualifications or not, but they will tell you that in the film. I've just forgotten. And anyway, the sun's coming out, so it's difficult for me to remember anything when the sun comes out, because that's been such a long time since I have seen sunshine. But they went to the Mojave Desert, and they chose a stretch of ground that was level and not obstructed by anything. That's not exactly difficult in the Mojave, but the point was they wanted to lay down a string of lights that would measure 0.6 of a mile or 1 kilometer in length. And then at night, they were going to send drones up to film this line of lights, because certain lights would represent certain stages in human history. So that whole kilometer or 0.6 of a mile represented the whole length of time that it's believed that there have been primates that were a little bit special that we started to call human beings. And they figure that was about 1 million years ago. So human beings have been in existence about 1 million years, and they wanted to represent that piece of time as a kilometer or 0.6 of a mile. Now, I am about 0.3 of a mile. So I'm about half that distance from the center of Hay-on-Wye, which you can see in the distance. If we take all that distance you can see now on this panorama into the town in front of me as the whole of human history, that whole 1 million years, the last 400 years of human history, so from the 17th century to the present day, only represents, I believe, 4 inches of that whole distance. And writing, the existence of writing at all, I think only represents about 8 to 10 inches of that distance. And I'm saying that to put the whole business of book snobbery into perspective. Let's go see. I see some sheep with lambs. Let's go see if we can get a view. Oh, I like the sound of that gate. Lovely sound. Okay, let's come over here, because up on this bank through, I'm going to have to find a place where I can lean on the fence. You will see. Here we are. So I'm going to speak more quietly now, because you can see ewes with their lambs. I don't really want to frighten them. I want them to do their natural thing. So in other words, going back to my original point, we haven't been using writing as a means of communicating ideas for very long. We've been using other forms of communication. We've been using music. We've been using visual symbols and artwork and the sound of our voice for longer than that. And even that 4 inches that I talked about that represents the last 400 years, well, most human beings, and now I've got to narrow my focus down to Western Europe and North America, the English-speaking parts of, literacy in those parts of the Western world really did not become widespread until the mid to late 19th century. So that probably takes it down to like 2 inches out of that whole space. So even less distance. We have not been reading books, by and large, for very long. And I think that's to be kept in mind too. We may yet have other stages in literacy evolution. Certainly the fact that books are now more easily available electronically, and the World Wide Web means that there's reading material available that maybe wasn't so easily available. And yet I also see, we've talked in here, and I've seen other booktube creators talking about the closure of libraries or the loss of funding. So there are interesting trends regarding literacy and reading. And I think we can jump to conclusions about people's reading a little bit too quickly. I've come around for a different view here of these two lovely, looks like a chestnut and a dun horse just grazing. The other point about book snobbery that I think should be made is that in English literature, and this may not be true in other languages, it may be that book snobbery is fundamentally an English phenomenon, but I will leave others to comment on that. I will only comment on English book snobbery, but I was taught where it originated. It originated really at the end of the 19th and the early 20th century, because, of course, literacy by then had grown. But although it had grown, I think readers perhaps they didn't really know, hadn't been exposed to literature that was more complex, and so they were looking for simple, entertaining stories, the penny dreadfuls and the many other periodicals that came out. Books were still a little expensive too, and that's something that still really doesn't get talked about, is how much money books cost and how that might contribute in some ways to people's book choices. But there came a split at the beginning of the 20th century as authors began to feel that fiction should be more experimental, narrative should do different things. Let's give you a beautiful view now. You can see of the mist clearing in the trees. I think it's going to be a gorgeous day. You can just see sky clearing there. Yeah, so authors, I was thinking Henry James was certainly amongst them. All those that were Catherine Mansfield, I'm trying to think of others that were in and around and after the First World War. Joyce, of course, is probably the prime example. Authors who began to feel that it was important now, if literature was now an art form, if the novel was now an art form, that it become more serious, that it do more than just entertain, that if it only entertained, well, that just wouldn't be good enough. And novels began to be written which experimented with style, with language, such that I think a first-time reader is going to find them really difficult and may not want to, maybe thinking, well, wait a second, I thought I knew what books were for, and now here I am encountering books that are really, really difficult to digest and deal with. Oh, there's a little opening there. We can watch the sheep. Let's go down there. And this split off, of course, also seemed to inspire the creation of a lot of genre fiction. So science fiction, romance, horror, detective fiction, and all forms of mystery and thriller, they all began to develop after the First World War, and perhaps in response to the fact that so many important authors felt they had to write something complex and artistic. And in the meantime, there was still this growing market, this growing literate market of readers who really, they weren't educated to be ready for what these authors were writing. They could cope with more straightforward fiction, a style that they had grown used to from 19th century fiction. And naturally that book market grew, but of course it acquired, what's the word I want? Look at those two lovely lambs coming out there. It acquired it almost became an inferior thing to read those books. It sort of said, oh, well, if you can only read those books and you can't make it up to the level of this experimental stuff that's coming out, well. And I think that is really where book snobbery started. But it's a shame. It's a shame because the genre fiction continued to develop. It also had its experimenters, and it had some really fantastic stories that, yes, might be told in a conventional fashion, but nevertheless, that doesn't make them easy to write. And I think this is also a misconception. This is a misconception that, and I cannot remember the author who said, easy reading is damned hard writing. But it is. To come up with time after time after time, for the writers who were good, for example, at crime fiction, to come out with a fresh story time after time, which could be read by someone who'd read a lot of crime fiction and was beginning to recognize some of the devices and the tropes, to continue to write stories that would surprise and engage experienced genre readers, that takes talent. And I don't think that's acknowledged enough, that genre reading, well done genre reading, I say easy genre reading is difficult writing. Good genre reading is difficult writing. And the writers who produce it are talented. They are just putting their talent to a different use. It is not that they are lesser, and it is not as though reading them is less of an achievement in reading terms. I don't think I'm going to go away from here because these lambs are just too cute. The other aspect of book snobbery I want to talk about is, of course, audiobooks. And I want to talk about that because, again, in human history, we heard stories long before we could read them. Simply because people were not literate until sort of if we're going to use that tape measure metaphor, the last 2 inches of the kilometer of human history. I've mixed up my measurement systems. Sorry about that, everyone. But not very much time. We have heard stories longer. And it used to be that poetry listened to and drama watched were the way that we got our stories. And we still benefited from those stories. And I think what people are, in fact, I don't know what people are arguing when they want to argue, especially when they use the word, when they choose to phrase the question, are audiobooks really reading? Because they're starting to mix up their concepts. Reading is specifically a skill for interpreting text on a page that you look at. That's reading. Listening to an audiobook is taking in a story, and reading a book is taking in a story. So reading text is taking in a story, and listening to text is taking in a story. And I think that's what should be compared. One shouldn't ask the question, is listening to audiobooks reading? Because reading is a specific skill. That would be like saying, is breathing the same as waving your arms? No, it's not. Both of them are moving air, but breathing is breathing and waving your arms is waving your arms. Listening to an audiobook is not reading, because reading is specifically interpreting text on a page. However, if we're talking about getting meaning from a story, listening to an audiobook is the same activity as reading a textbook. I suppose what you could argue somewhat is that if you're talking about studying a book, so not taking in a book just for entertainment, but you're doing like what I'm doing with Middlemarch. You're just getting in there, looking word for word, studying paragraphs very closely, counting words, noting similar types of words appearing in text. If you're doing that, then a print text probably works better for that than an audiobook. And if your retention is an issue, like mine is with an audiobook, then fine. But audiobooks are sometimes the only way that some people can take in a story, and I wouldn't want to deny stories to anybody. Our human history shows that we need stories. We need them. However we get them, whether we listen to a song, we hear a poem, we see it in artwork, in visual artwork, that's how we've gotten stories for quite a few centuries, or whether we listen to an audiobook or read a book in text. We need the stories. We don't necessarily need, I don't think, the experimental or interesting stylistic ways of doing books. That's a thing that has occurred during this last century and a half, will probably continue, but I don't think it's essential. And I don't think being a reader means that you must delve into some of these books. Back through the gate again, just so I can make that noise. I'd like to say, too, if you consider yourself to be someone who's read only recent fiction for entertainment, but you suddenly think, I want to read all these books that are considered so important, so groundbreaking. I want to read Ulysses. I want to read, who else? Faulkner. There's George Eliot. I think I would go about it in a very controlled and planned manner, and I would get some help. There is absolutely no shame in approaching these books with the help of someone who's more experienced. Absolutely not. I want to point out, I'm really impressed with the videos that David at Polyglot Reader has been doing. Polyglot Reading. I always get his channel name wrong. And he's preparing everyone for Ulysses. He's just done a 2-hour video on the Bible to prepare people for the reading of Ulysses. And I think that's fantastic, because he's recognizing that in our latter 20th and early 21st century, people are not necessarily familiar with the Bible, and James Joyce wouldn't have written thinking that would happen. And so I think his preparation there is fantastic. And of course, the videos he's done for Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain are also extremely helpful. And I think the one good thing that BookTube can do, hopefully, is first of all, not make you feel worried about what you do and don't read. But if you should decide, I do want to tackle some of these scary books, these books everyone talks about that I'm supposed to be so interested in reading, first of all, don't do it in quantity right away. Work your way in gradually and avail yourself of all the help that there is online to understand those books, and go through it slowly. Take one book, go through it slowly, and then allow yourself to read other things around it that are more what you're accustomed to reading, so that you don't feel overwhelmed and weighted down and just bored and discouraged, because you can kill your interest in reading just by choosing the wrong material, or choosing the wrong material at the wrong time. And time matters so much as well. When we're all under so much stress right now for various reasons. And I do feel, oh, listen to that. Go for it. Oh, it's doing way better than me. We'll just stop me doing this video and we'll just let the birds take over. Oh, no, they're going to go quiet now. But there can be times in life when it just isn't right to be tackling something that's intellectually demanding. Some people can cope with it better than others. There are personality types where what they want to do when they're under stress, oh, I'm really being competed with here, what they want to do is read something that's intellectually challenging because they can get lost in it. But I do think that tends to be someone with a lot of experience in that kind of reading, who's already been taught and who they aren't coming to it as new territory. But when I watch the person who watches television, for example, who reads virtually just crime and thrillers for fiction and then some history for nonfiction, when I see how lost he is in a book and I see how much he benefits, you can tell when you've had a really good reading session. Can't you? You can, because you just feel so relaxed and calm, and it creates a meditative state of mind. And to me, that is sometimes more important than reading the right thing, which of course might not put you in that frame of mind. You do have to make sure that you prepare the ground, I think, if you were going to tackle more difficult books. And you may not be in the right place in your life to make that correct, prepared time. And you need to think about that too. I just think better not to do it than to do it badly is my motto. And I guess the last thing I want to say on this subject, I'm going to talk about nonfiction. We've mostly been dealing with fiction in the discussion of book snobbery, but nonfiction. A lot of nonfiction is written by people with academic qualifications to impress other people with academic qualifications. Not all of it, but some of the better stuff is. And it's unfortunate, I think, that there isn't and it would take bravery, I suppose, to begin a market for nonfiction aimed at people who are curious about a subject, but they're new to the subject. They really need a carefully written book that presents subject matter to them in a way they can deal with. And I don't see that a lot of times in nonfiction. You get the odd book, and I try when I review nonfiction to really point out whether I feel that the book is written sympathetically for the average reader, or whether it's being written for the author's academic colleagues to impress them with the depth of research. Not that depth of research is bad, but you have to be careful how you present information, because certain almost density of information can become too difficult for people to deal with when they're reading. And a lot of people are put off nonfiction for that reason, which is a shame. But I don't know. I don't think that's going to change. And I do feel that probably the most difficult thing will be to persuade people to read nonfiction just to broaden their understanding of certain subjects. But I can understand if some people, it's just too heavy. We have so much going on in our lives. And I think some of us just have more practice. If you've been reading nonfiction for a long time, it gets easier. That is, I suppose, true of anything, isn't it? Whatever you've done for years and years and years is easier than when you begin it for the first time. And I think a lot of people come to BookTube and other people's reading gets them all excited, and then they attempt other people's reading and they're finding, oh my goodness, this is something I'm not experienced at, and I feel uncomfortable. I'm not sure whether I am getting what I should out of a book. Because people often, I think too, assume that if they pick a work of nonfiction, they should understand everything that they read in that book. They shouldn't have a couple of pages where they think, I'm sorry, I didn't really follow that. You can read a work of nonfiction and only understand some of it. It is still worthwhile to read through the book, even if you come away and all you can say is, well, I learned this, this, and this, and I really didn't get much more out of the book. That can still be beneficial And I know it sounds weird, but I've come away from books with just a few points that I can take forward. But the next book gets easier. And again, it's all an issue of practice and time. And so that, of course, means it's an issue of how much time do you have, and can you fit that in with all the other books you want to read? Maybe not. Maybe not. And this is why it's very difficult to bring snobbishness to the whole issue of reading, because you're going to have to know somebody quite well for years before you could honestly say of them, oh, they could read this or this, but they're not trying. I thought, we have no idea what people are dealing with besides their reading lives. We only show everybody that little corner of our lives where we're reading, but people are handling so much other stuff. In fact, it amazes me how some people are reading and still handling all of that. It really does. It amazes me is all I can say. I admire it. So those are my rambling thoughts on book snobbery. Now I'm going to go back into Hay-on-Wye proper. We're going to look around the bookshops. I'll tell you what's on my mind right now to look around for in all those shops are some old British mystery novels. The British Library has come out with about 100 titles that they've reissued of vintage British crime writing mystery novels, and I fancy that right now. I really would like that as something to leaf in between some of the heavier stuff that I tend to tackle, and so that's for me. I like the heavy stuff, yeah, sure, but then I spent 8 years working with academics and professors to get better at working with the heavy stuff. I don't think I'd really be so keen on it if I hadn't had their help, and I'm getting help here from booktubers to tackle books as well. And so, yeah, I think the resources are there if your life is in a place right now where you want to tackle that. But if not, I say don't worry about it. Really don't worry about it, because I think the universal themes that are good for us to deal with, you can get those in all kinds of books. The life lessons, the ability to empathize with other people, you can get that from all kinds of books. It doesn't have to be the more recognized literary works, whatever that means, because there is an element of snobbery in there, absolutely. But I don't know, really all I think you get with the more literary works is a more, perhaps you could say, a more imaginative and creative use of the language and the style and the structure of the book. I don't think you necessarily get truths in literary works that you would never get in a genre work. I think no, I think you'd find those truths in a lot of books and in a lot of other art forms. So that's my take on book snobbery. I do the heavier stuff, but I do like taking breaks and reading other stuff. Person who watches television is genre fiction only, and he enjoys what he reads. He's a good judge of what he reads as well, so he has experience in that genre, and I think there's something to be said for having experience within a particular genre, being able to talk about it as a specialist. That I think is pretty cool too. I can't do that, but I really admire the booktube creators who can. Right, everybody, I want to get into a bookshop because that's the whole reason we drove out all this way. But I look forward to talking to you all again soon. I don't, for the life, I couldn't say right now what you're going to get next, but so we'll leave it as a surprise, shall we? In the meantime, everybody, good reading. Take care. Bye-bye.